Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and look at the absolute foundation that protects every other pillar we've discussed so far. The source material makes a really bold claim here. Every single pillar we've named depends entirely on one thing: the man standing in front of the room. Think about it. If the shepherd doesn't hold the faith, nothing downstream of him survives. So this fifth pillar is the one that safeguards all the others, the standard for the eldership. Over the next few minutes, we're going to unpack the exact step-by-step chronological sequence the text lays out to rebuild this foundation.
Well, here is the stark inversion the data exposes. Just look at how modern pastoral job descriptions are written. They usually lead with vision, charisma, communication skills, and organizational ability. They list character and doctrine last, if they even list them at all, and they rarely test them seriously. But Scripture? It does the exact opposite. Out of roughly 20 qualifications listed across 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, the overwhelming majority are rooted entirely in character.
In fact, when you look at those 20 qualifications, only one is actually a competency, being able to teach. And even that is defined strictly by doctrinal fidelity. Titus 1:9 makes this incredibly clear, demanding that the leader hold fast the faithful word as he has been taught, so that he may be able, by sound doctrine, to both exhort and convict those who contradict. The Apostle Peter adds to this as well in 1 Peter 5, saying leaders should shepherd the flock willingly, not acting as lords over those entrusted to them, but being examples.
So why is this so critical? Because the pew always reflects the pulpit. When a shepherd doesn't hold or teach a biblical worldview, you can guarantee the flock generally won't either. The moral failures behind our recent collapses in public trust, they aren't just random accidents. The research points to them as the highly predictable fruit of hiring for gifting over character. To fix this, the source argues we absolutely must rigorously vet character and doctrine instead of just assuming they're present. We need to rewrite the elder profile to lead with those biblical qualifications: blamelessness, self-control, an ordered household, and the ability by sound doctrine to convict those who contradict, and put the platform skills dead last. We have to form the next generation of pastors on biblical theology first and leadership literature second. This entirely reverses the training order that produced the modern executive pastor, the guy whose real training was essentially just in corporate management.
Now, you can't implement all 5 of these pillars at once. Honestly, you shouldn't even try. Reconstructing this requires a really strict chronological sequence. It's built across 5 distinct phases, stretching from phase 0 all the way out to phase 4. Let's break down how they compound over time.
Starting with phase 0, alignment. This covers months 0 through 3.
In these first 3 months, the focus is entirely on the leadership getting perfectly aligned internally. The elders study the diagnosis together, they officially adopt the biblical standard for the office, and they choose the church's catechism. The text is super clear here. Absolutely nothing durable gets built until the leadership owns a standard that cannot move. You have to lock in that foundational theology first.
Moving right into phase 1, the pulpit and the door, covering months 3 to 12.
Okay, so here the focus shifts to the 2 major levers a pastor can pull without waiting on anyone else to act. First, you begin systematic expository preaching. Second, you completely replace that typical brief membership orientation with a robust, instruction-based course tied directly to the catechism. By preaching the whole counsel of God systematically and requiring deep doctrinal instruction for membership, you are fundamentally transforming the church's theological diet right at the front door.
Next up is phase 2, the household, spanning years 1 and 2.
As we enter the second year, the real work migrates away from the church building and directly into the living rooms of the congregation. The church rolls out family worship, giving them a simple daily liturgy, and crucially, actually trains the parents to lead it. This is slow, deeply personal work, but equipping parents to lead their own homes, that is the highest leverage investment a church can possibly make. Because most Christian parents don't lead family worship simply because no one has ever shown them how, not because they're refusing to.
All right, that brings us to phase 3, the children first, which spans years 2 to 4.
And this number brilliantly illustrates the urgency of this phase. Why 13? Because every single data stream in the source material converges on one terrifying fact. A child's worldview is permanently poured, like concrete, before age 13. After that, the window largely closes.
Because that worldview window shuts so early, church programs have to be realigned to support exactly what the parents are now doing at home. We have to completely rebuild children's and youth ministries around the catechism and integrated apologetics. We need to be answering the actual tough questions young people are asking today. And remember,
The ultimate goal is always reinforcing household discipleship. You never replace it, the church just comes alongside the parents.
Finally, we reach phase 4, generational maintenance, kicking in at year 4 and continuing indefinitely. Year 4 and beyond is all about sustaining and reproducing this entire system over generations. Think of it like an engine. The input of catechized children yields a compounding result of future catechizing parents. Those instructed members become the exact pool from which your biblically qualified elders are drawn later on. This self-renewing system is exactly how the church successfully functioned for 2 centuries, turning today's deeply instructed youth into tomorrow's leaders.
Now, obviously, rebuilding all of this takes time. Honestly, it might even look like a step backward if you're only looking at modern growth metrics at first. It requires counting the cost, exactly as Luke 14 warns us to do. This sequence asks a pastor to trade the quick, easy applause of a broad, shallow crowd for the slow, quiet patience of depth. It's about building with materials that will actually survive the fire, instead of just running quick, scalable programs.
Set the standard, feed the body, disciple the home, aim at the children, then hold the line long enough for it to compound. As we wrap up this explainer, the ultimate question the data forces us to answer is this: will you build for speed, or will you build for permanence? Are we going to keep chasing modern scale, or are we going to return to the old paths that actually endure? I really encourage you to think deeply about what true, lasting formation looks like for the next generation.